The Outermost House, A Year of Life on the Great Beach of Cape Cod by Henry Beston. Chapter 8, Night on the Great Beach, Section 2. At intervals during the summer, often enough when the tides are high and the moon is near the full, the surf along the beach turns from a churn of empty moonlit water to a mass of panic life. Driven in by schools of larger fish, swarms of little fish enter the tumble of the surf, and eaters follow them. The surf catches them both up and throws them, mauled and confused, ashore. Under a sailing moon, the whole churn of sea close off the beach vibrates with the primeval ferocity and intensity of life. Yet, is this war of rushing mouth and living food without a sound save for the breaking of the seas. But let me tell of such a night. I had spent an afternoon ashore with friends, and they had driven me to Nauset Station just after 9 o'clock. The moon, 2 days from the full, was very lovely on the moors and on the channels and flat, moon-green isles of the lagoon. The wind was southerly and light. Moved by its own enormous rhythms, the surf that night was a stately incoming of high, serried waves, the last wave alone breaking. This inmost wave broke heavily in a smother and a rebound of sandy foam, and thin sheets of seas racing before it up the beach vanished endlessly into the endless thirst of the sands. As I neared the surf rim to begin my walk to the southward, I saw that the beach close along the breakers, as far as the eye could reach, was curiously at winkle in the moonlight, with the convulsive dance of myriads of tiny fish. The breakers were spilling them on the sands. The surf was a swarm with the creatures. It was indeed, for the time being, a surf of life. And this surf of life was breaking for miles along the cape. Little herring or mackerel, sand eels, I picked a dancer out of the slide and helped him up to the moon. It was the familiar sand eel or sand lance of the waters between Hatteras and Labrador. This is no kin of the true eels, though he rather resembles one in general appearance, for his body is slender, eel-like, and round. Instead of ending bluntly, however, this eel has a large, well-forked tail. The fish in the surf were 2 or 3 inches long. Homeward that night, I walked barefooted in the surf, watching the convulsive, twinkling dance, now and then feeling the squirm of a fish across my toes. Presently, something occurred which made me keep to the thinnest edge of the foam. Some 10 feet ahead, an enormous dogfish was suddenly borne up the beach on the rim of a slide of foam. He moved with it unresisting while it carried him, the slide withdrawing and drying up. It rolled him twice over seaward. He then twisted heavily, and another minor slide carried him back again to shore. The fish was about 3 feet long, a real junior shark, purplish black in the increasing light, for the moon was moving west across the long axis of the breakers, and his dark, important bulk seemed strange in the bright dance of the smaller fish about him. It was then that I began to look carefully at the width of gathering seas. Here were the greater fish, the mouths, the eaters who had driven the eels ashore to the edge of their world and into ours. The surf was alive with dogfish, aswarm with them, with the rush, the cold bellies, the twist and tear of their wolfish violence of life. Yet there was but little sign of it in the waters. A rare fin slicing past, and once the odd and instant glimpse of a fish embedded like a fly in amber in the bright, overturning volute of a wave. Too far in, the dogfish were now in the grip of the surf, and presently began to come ashore. As I walked the next half-mile, every other breaker seemed to leave behind its ebb a mauled and stranded sharklet feebly sculling with his tail. I kicked many back into the seas, risking a tow, perhaps. Some I caught by the tails and flung, for I did not want them corrupting on the beach. The next morning, in the 1.75 miles between the forecastle and the station, I counted 71 dogfish lying dead on the upper beach. There were also a dozen or two skates. The skate is really a kind of shark, which had stranded the same night. Skates follow in many things, and are forever being flung upon these sands. I sat up late that night at the forecastle, often putting down the book I read to return to the beach. A little after 11 came Bill Eldridge to the door, with a grin on his face and one hand held behind his back. "Have you ordered tomorrow's dinner yet?" said he. "No." "Well, here it is." And Bill produced a fine cod from behind his back. "Just found him right in front of your door, alive and flopping." Yes, haddock and cod often chase those sand eels in with the bigger fish. Often find them on the beach about this time of the year. "Got any place to keep him?" "Let me have a piece of string, and I will hang him on your clothesline. He'll keep all right." With a deft unforking of 2 fingers, Bill drew the line through the gills, and as he did so, the heavy fish flopped noisily. No fear about him being dead. Make a nice chowder. Bill stepped outside. I'd heard him at the clothesline. Afterward, we talked till it was time for him to shoulder his clock and Goston case again, pick up his watch cap, whistle in his little black dog, and go down over the dune to the beach and Nauset Station. There were nights in June when there was phosphorescence in the surf and on the beach, and one such night I think I shall remember as the most strange and beautiful of all the year. Early this summer, the middle beach molded itself into a bar, and between it and the dunes are long, shallow runnels into which the ocean spills over at high tide. Over the night I ride off. The first quarter of the moon hung in the west, and its light on the sheets of incoming tide coursing thin across the bar was very beautiful to see. Just after sundown, I walked to Nauset with friends who had been with me during the afternoon. The tide was still rising, and the current running in the pools. I lingered at the station with my friends till the last of sunset had died, and the light upon the planet, which had been moonlight mingled with sunset pink, had cleared to a pure cold moon. Southward, then, I turned, and because the flooded runnels were deep close by the station, I could not cross them and had to walk their inner shores. The tide had fallen half a foot, perhaps, but the breakers were still leaping up against the bar as against a wall, the greater ones still spilling over sheets of vanishing foam. It grew darker with the westing of the moon. There was light on the western tops of the dunes, a fainter light on the lower beach and the breakers. The face of the dunes was the unity of dusk. The tide had ebbed in the pools, and their edges were wet and dark. There was a strange contrast between the still levels of the pool and the seas of the sea. I kept close to the land edge of the lagoons, and as I advanced, my boots kicked wet. Spatters of sand ahead, as they might have kicked particles of snow. Every spatter was a crumb of phosphorescence. I walked in a dust of stars. Behind me, in my footprints, luminous patches burned. With the double ebb moonlight and tide, the deepening brims of the pools took shape in smoldering, wet fire. So strangely did the luminous speckles smolder and die and glow that it seemed as if some wind were passing, by whose breath they were kindled and extinguished. Occasional whole breakers of phosphorescence rolled in out of the vague sea, the whole wave, one ghostly motion, one creamy light, and breaking against the bar, flung up pale sprays of fire. A strange thing happens here during these luminous tides. The phosphorescence is itself a mass of life, sometimes protozoan its origin, sometimes bacterial, the phosphorescence I write of being probably the latter. Once this living light has seeped into the beach, colonies of it speedily invade the tissues of the 10,000 sand fleas which are forever hopping on this edge of ocean. Within an hour, the gray bodies of these swarming amphipods, these useful, ever-hungry sea scavengers, show phosphorescent pinpoints, and these points grow and unite till the whole creature is luminous. The attack is really a disease, an infection of light. The process had already begun when I arrived on the beach on the night of which I'm writing, and the luminous fleas hopping off before my boots were an extraordinary sight. It was curious to see them hop from the pool rims to the upper beach, paling as they reached the width of peaceful moonlight lying landward of the strange, crawling beauty of the pools. This infection kills them, I think. At least, I've often found the larger creatures lying dead on the fringe of the beach, his huge porcelain eyes and water-gray body, one core of living fire. Round and about him, disregarding, 10,000 kinsmen, carrying on life and the plan of life, ate off the bounty of the tide.